Well, after the State of the Nation address nearly 2 weeks ago now, the budget coming up on Wednesday, still huge questions to ask, or to answer, about how government is dealing with our electricity crisis, especially with Stage 6. We're going to be on Stage 6 until at least Wednesday because of the problems they're having. You may remember President Cyril Ramaphosa promising both a new electricity minister and declaring a state of national disaster over the electricity crisis. We don't yet have a new electricity minister. We don't yet have the regulations around the national state of disaster. Volker van Widdern is the head of strategic risk practice at Riskonet Afrika. Volker, good afternoon to you. I appreciate the time. You look at scenario planning. Obviously, the electricity crisis is the biggest problem we have. Do you believe, from what we've seen so far, that we may get something concrete, some sort of concrete solution or implementation plan in the budget?
Good afternoon, Stephen, to your viewers. I believe it's one of the possible outcomes, but that's exactly why we talk about scenario planning. There'll be a general desire and intention to improve matters. But when you look at scenario planning in this context, we know that we've got a raft of potential political, structural, cabinet meeting and all that line of authority and governance potential outcomes. And we've got a range of technical outcomes, we've got a range of potential economic outcomes, and that's why scenario planning is so important.
Has he given us, really, any information from which to plan scenarios? I mean, you could pick through his speech and say, well, there's a change here and there's a change there. Very hard to find specific numbers.
Well, if we look at it from the ground up, we know that the power stations are getting older. We know that the two very big new power stations are going to take several years to reach full operating capacity. So one's reaching a point where we know that the actual net new capacity coming through is going to be moderate, if not going to be declining. And that is a critical issue in this environment. Everyone's hoping for improved maintenance, but the real plan, and let's say the next 500 engineers or whomever specialists that are needed to get that maintenance to increase the energy availability factor by 5 or 10% that's planned as a scenario, are not in place yet or have not been communicated. So the other part of the scenario is what are the facts that we know? And it's very encouraging to see reports like there's a major housing estate that's going to be able to influence the load shedding factor by 4 stages. The more we talk about nodal power generation and microgrids, those are the kind of things where you can actually make certain plans in a communal or a collaborative environment where those kind of partnerships can actually work. And then what you do is that you link those plans to the known new facts, whether it's a Minister of Electricity or whether it's more money for diesel or whichever it may be. And I think this wait-and-see issue is what we're saying is a strategic risk, because the biggest risk is doing nothing.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, nearly 2 weeks ago, the promise of a new minister. Nearly 2 weeks ago, the declaration of a state of national disaster, no regulations. If there's no sign that the president can live up to his promises, that must make it much harder to plan, and also means that the next time he makes promises, I don't know if people will believe him.
That's the point. So that we work with the certainty that we have, which is moderate declining electricity availability, but with the great single factor that we now can all generate our own electricity, if this was the key case we're talking about. There are many other kinds of scenario plans we can go think about. But under power generation, and particularly now, where we're moving between 2 and 6, if you're running a factory that is just too big to run on a generator that we currently have, the question is, should we not be putting down, in a collaborative sense, a turbine generator in an industrial zone? And that is what we call nodal or microgrid environments. And in that context, one can share that electricity and totally remove the risk of the load shedding and then run your factory at 100%. Now, waiting for load shedding to stop, I'm afraid, is going to wait for the sun to rise elsewhere. Rather think about an optimized structure where you can actually run your factory at 100% and get the economic gain of that coming through the economy. And those are the elements that I think people really need to decide what the trade-offs are, what are the lines in the sand, and make new plans that they're actually certain of and over which they have influence.
So at the moment then, I mean, the scenarios that we need to look for all basically go down to solving the problem yourself, in the end, solving the problem with yourself and your neighbors.
To a large degree. So when we solve a problem, if we only solve the problem to the extent of 20 to 40% of our capacity, or we can pull in our only own power, enough capacity to keep the factory running at 100%, supported by some diesel, some this, some that, then we've solved most of the problem. And I think that's the issue. We're running at such a low level compared to optimal economic performance that is one of the key reasons why the country's not growing, is that everyone's running on a conservative basis, not employing, not investing, concerned about underutilization of assets. If we turn it around, where we can actually take control of our own power generation, we lift up the economy and our own power generation enormously. Of course, if you're in the mining sector, you also then want to do something about the railways, but we're not talking about that now.
Volker, I think the problem really is that people's scenarios, whether you're at home or whether you're running a factory, as you point to, are just getting more and more depressing. In a way, the space that people have in which to operate seems to be getting smaller and smaller. If you don't have the capital to do it for yourself, whether you're as a business or as a homeowner, you're actually in deep trouble. That's what it looks like.
But that's the benefit of doing this in a scenario and a collaborative base. I think one of the good news stories of the budget is the indicated tax deduction of some kind for home-based solar power. Now, can you imagine if one then rolls that out on a really wide scale, where you can probably reduce the cost of that solar installation by a good 30-40%. That electricity is then coming in at a fixed cost, and the great opportunity of that is that you're going to pay less comparatively to the quickly increasing Eskom rates over time. So in fact, you're going to pay less for electricity and make yourself independent in your home. And if you don't want it in your home, you sell it back to the grid. Now imagine if you've got 1,000 houses around a shopping center and you're selling electricity back to the shopping center and you don't happen to use it at home. You're turning your home into an economic asset. So I think there are some silver linings in this when we all work together and really become more involved in what we call microgrids and the related mass-scale power generation through solar and battery.
Volker van Widdern, thank you. Head of Strategic Risk Practice at Riskonet Afrika. Really do appreciate the time.